Hey everyone, Firegross here, and today I want to talk about how to be red map viable within 8 hours of a league start. Getting ahead on day 1 comes down to 3 things mainly. The first thing is getting through the campaign as fast as possible. The second thing is knowing what all your upgrades look like and all the purchases that you need to make early on in the league. And then the third thing is knowing how to generate currency as early as possible, so you can get a hold of these upgrades and then speed up the rest of your progression. Now, while I probably will eventually make content on the first 2 things, that being getting through the campaign as fast as possible and then figuring out all the things you need to buy, the thing I'm going to focus on today is the third thing, and that is how to generate all that early currency so that you can just start buying your upgrades and racing your way through maps. Now, this leads me to the strategy that I'm going to be sharing with you guys today, and this is something I've already been doing kind of off stream for the last few leagues, but I've decided I'm going to share it with the community. It's not something that can be bricked by other people knowing about it. You know, this strategy relies upon generating raw currency for the most part, and that means that it doesn't matter how many people know about this, there's no way it's going to be diminished in terms of how good it is, and so I see no reason to keep this from people. So to start this strategy off, once you finish the campaign, you're first going to make sure that all your slots have at least 4 links in them. Now, the easiest way to do this is with Orbs of Binding. Orbs of Binding are kind of a low-value currency. You can buy these off the trade set, and they basically just turn a normal item into a 4 link, but if you had a good loot filter, you probably should have picked up 4 links for every slot by the time you finish the campaign. Now, providing you've done that, and you don't need your Jeweler's Orbs and your Orbs of Fusings immediately, you're going to convert all your Jewelers into Orbs of Fusings, and then all your Orbs of Fusing into Orbs of Chance at any vendor. Next up, you're going to go to the Rogue Harbor and go straight to Volcano. Volcano sells a whole bunch of contracts, and they each cost 1 Orb of Chance, with the exception of some that cost Orbs of Alchemy. For the most part, you're going to ignore the ones that cost Orbs of Alchemy, and only just buy the ones that cost Orbs of Chance, and you're just going to buy out the entire window worth of contracts. Now, these are usually going to be at an item level matching your level, and you're going to be doing this below item level 68, which means that all the contracts you're running at this point are granting you reveals, and any deception contracts you run with Gianna are going to grant you the discounted Gianna reveals, which if you're doing blueprints later on, this could be worth 5 to 7 C each contract that you run. So this strategy is just as simple as running the heist contract, picking up all the loot along the way, opening all the small and large chests that you can without filling up the alert bar to 100%, and then obtaining the mission target at the end of the heist and carrying it out successfully so that you can trade it in for rogue markers. Something most people don't realize is that Heist, along with Blighted maps, are the best league mechanics in the game for doing Chaos Recipe early in a league. However, Blighted maps suffer from needing to be traded constantly, and there can be a total lack of supply on the market, so it can be a little harder to access that in order to benefit from Chaos Recipe. Heist contracts can be completely self-sustained using the strategy that I'm outlining at the moment, so you can just generate infinite amounts of Chaos Recipe. So I've tested this at this point extensively, both off and on stream, and both times I tested, I did this on a character that was in the low level 60s. I had 4 links in every slot of gear. You know, there wasn't even a tabula rasa or 5 links or anything. It was just as budget as could possibly be. I didn't have my Uberlab ascendancy. I had nothing going for me. Like, I tried to pick the slowest and least progressed characters possible, because that's probably the state you're going to be coming out of the campaign in if you were racing through the campaign in the first place. Now, what makes this strat so good is that in addition to getting about 100 C worth of mapping currencies and then about 15 C worth of rogue markers per hour, you're getting 50 raw Chaos Orbs per hour, roughly, on average, between both the raw Chaos Orb drops and also the Chaos Recipe. And this is really big, because this is money that you don't have to then go, you know, to trade for, right? With all the mapping currencies, you're probably going to be using this stuff. It's kind of unfair to value it as, you know, money earned that you can spend towards upgrades, because a lot of the time, you know, like your Orbs of Alchemy, your Val Orbs, your Scours, etc., they're going to be used while you're mapping, right? We're actually going to be using this currency, so it's not liquid. It's not stuff that we can just sell off and, you know, turn into Chaos Orbs. And even if you wanted to do that stuff, a lot of the time you can't, because no one out there is looking to buy 2, you know, Orbs of Scouring 8 hours into a league. So being able to generate 50 raw Chaos Orbs per hour and about 100 raw Chaos Orbs within a 2-hour period means that you have access to a ton of upgrades. And being so early in the league that you're doing this, you're able to purchase these upgrades before they inflate in price. So if you get a Tabula Rasa really early in a league, it can cost 12C. However, if you leave it till later on in the day, it can cost as much as 18C. And then if you go to sleep and wake up the next morning, it's probably going to cost 25C, right? With pretty much almost doubling in cost. Some leagues, depending on the demand and the supply. And this is kind of a real problem. You need to get these upgrades as early as possible a lot of the time, and this is what this strategy excels at. It just puts tons upon tons of raw currency into your hands really early in the league. You know, like, providing you're able to do the campaign quickly, a lot of the time you're going to be doing the strat, and you're going to have, like, a 5-link weapon and a 6-link tabula rasa, as well as all these other, like, smaller upgrades, such as an anointed amulet, or perhaps an enchanted helm, if the supply exists for it. There are certain types of, like, important uniques that potentially you need, and you're going to have access to all this stuff before most of your friends even finish the campaign, and you're going to be able to do this consistently. This doesn't rely upon any kind of RNG or anything. Every time we did this test, I just completely removed all the exalted orbs I got from my testing. I didn't count any of the unique drops I got. Now, unique drops add a lot of money to the amount of, like, currency you earn from doing this strat, and every time I tested, I just didn't pick up a single unique. It means that when you actually go and execute the strategy on day one of the league, you're going to be making more money than what my tests are saying that you're making. So what takes this strat to the next level is that it's totally self-sustainable. This doesn't require any trading whatsoever, right? We are generating all these contracts completely on our own without any trading, and then turning them into raw chaos orbs without any trading as well. This means that, in a totally solo self-found environment, you can just print chaos orbs, which is crazy. No other strategy in the entire game works this way, which is why I really feel like it needs to be shed. So whenever you run out of contracts, you just repeat steps 1 and 2. You take all the Jeweler's Orbs and the Orbs of Fusing, convert them into Orbs of Chance, go back to Wakano, and buy out all of these contracts. Now, whenever you level up, Wakano refreshes his window of contracts, and you get about 10 per level up. Between levels 60 and 70, doing 10 contracts is guaranteed to give you more than a level up, and that means that you can never run out of contracts. I think you can keep doing this until you're about in the mid-level 70s. The thing is, you never want to get to this point, right? You only want to do the strat for the first couple hours of the league until you've bought all the upgrades that you need to get through to red maps. And this is kind of important. You do want to pre-plan this and figure this out on a, build-by-build basis. Every build's a little different, and you want to figure out exactly the minimum level of gear that you need in order to do red maps ahead of time, so that you can just figure out what all the important upgrades are for you, and then buy them, and then that way you can finish doing the strategy as quickly as possible. So I spent about 6 to 7 hours testing this strat over the last couple of days in half-an-hour blocks, and those half-an-hour blocks are basically just 10 contracts. You can do about 10 contracts in half an hour, and each time I went back to Wakano, just from the Jeweler's Orbs, the Orbs of Fusing, and the Chance Orbs that I earned from that previous run of 10 contracts, I was massively over-sustaining the amount of Chance Orbs needed to buy the next 10 contracts from the next window. And that means that you're always going to over-sustain the cost of your contracts, which also means that later on, while doing this strat, when you're perhaps nearing the end of hour 2, you can stop converting all your Jeweler's Orbs and your Fusings and just leave them as raw currency, which you can then use on gear later on if you want, or you can just sell it into Chaos Orbs. So this strategy has a number of pros and cons. I'm going to talk about the cons first, because I don't want people to think that I'm potentially overselling a strategy that doesn't work. The cons are basically that you're spending 2 hours not progressing your Atlas, and this is kind of a big deal, because if you don't prepare and you don't understand the strat and why you're doing it, then you're going to be wasting 2 hours that you could have just, spent progressing the Atlas. The entire point of this strategy is to go and buy all the upgrades you need to get to red maps before actually entering a map. And this means that once you do get to maps, you can just clear the maps really fast. You're not wasting a lot of time. The reason that I started doing this was because a few leagues ago, I sort of noticed that when you do wipe maps straight after finishing the campaign, a lot of the time you end up taking, 10 minutes per map on auto builds. Especially with the nerfs to 3.15. Characters are weak on lava. You get to red maps and you are completely starved for power, and mobs are hitting like a truck. You're barely making, you're barely reaching your resist cap and 3k life, and you just don't have enough damage to sort of plow through the map while sustaining your Quicksilver Flask. And you need to do every league mechanic that shows up because you need to sustain desperately. You have virtually no mapping currency whatsoever, and yet you need to use every bit of mapping currency that you can on your white maps just to sort of progress to yellow maps, and it just means that everything is kind of a slog, and everything is slow initially, and the whole point of the strategy is to sort of circumvent that initial slump of, in the league, right? And I think there was one league where I measured that in the first 2 hours of the league, I got exactly 14 maps done, which wasn't a lot, right? It was very fortunate that, through 14 maps I was able to get to yellow maps, just through a lucky set of tier ups and upgrades, right? And I had a couple of owl orbs that just went from tier 2 to 3, and then from tier 4 to 5, and then 5 to 6. You can't rely on that every time, though, and reflecting upon that made me realize that there needs to be a better way to tackle the early part of a league. So by doing this strat, you're starting your mapping once you've already acquired all your upgrades, and you know at this point that all you need to do now is just get stuck into mapping. You just need to run the maps, and you have all the mapping currencies that you need pretty much to invest in all your maps, and even if you run out, you now have a stockpile of Chaos Orbs as well that you can just go buy chisels, Val Orbs, etc. to sort of kickstart your mapping. And this is also really valuable because early in the league, chisels, sextants, all that sort of stuff, they tend to be very cheap. And if you have leftover Chaos Orbs that you don't need to spend on your upgrades, you can buy this stuff. Part of the reason why chisels and sextants are really cheap at the start of the league is because no one's buying them, and people have excesses of these currencies, and they want to sell these currencies so they can buy upgrades, but no one else is buying them because everyone else wants to spend whatever currency they have on upgrades. Well, you can sort of get around that and sort of break the meta in a way, because by getting your upgrades first, as soon as possible, now you have a bunch of money and you can go buying, there was a time that chisels were like 10 to 1C, right? Which is kind of crazy. You're you're able to add 20 quant to like 2.5 maps for 1C a pop. Sextant's sort of similar price. You can get ridiculous rates on them if, you're sort of picky and you're able to buy them early enough. And this makes a really big difference once you get to like yellow maps and you're trying to break into reds. You suddenly have a stockpile of chisels, a stockpile of sextants, as well as also having a ton of alchemy orbs and orbs of binding that you acquired while you were heisting, right? And as well as Val orbs, right? It's pretty much like it. I think you doing this strat on average, you finish the 2 hours with around 20 plus Val orbs, and you earn a fair few Val orbs while you're doing league mechanics and just playing normally as well. So you will spend them faster than you earn them, but the thing is they should last you all the way to red maps, and worst case scenario you can just buy more, right? And so yeah, it's just it's a lot better overall. And the other thing is kind of, I know this sort of doesn't have any place in talking about like min-maxing, but I still feel it's worth mentioning anyway, is that you have higher quality of life and lower day one burnout. And as much as people want to pretend this isn't important, this is important, right? If you want to be playing 20 hours a day, being able to do it in a way that's sort of relaxing and not mentally intensive is very important. If you are having to do a lot of heavy, thinking and and you're really stressing out about how you're going to hit your upgrades, and you're dying a lot because perhaps your build is not as strong as what it needs to be for the level of maps that you're tackling, and you sort of just like corpse rushing your way through yellow maps, that's going to become exhausting very quickly. You're going to want to take more breaks, so you can sort of clear your head and detilt and all that. And doing it this way means that you hit white maps with like a tabula, and in my case, I was practicing Toxic Rain. I hit white maps with a Tabula and a 5-link Quill Rain. A lot of my gems already also have an extra level 2 on them. I have pretty much all the other items I need. I have an Anoint, I have resist caps, over 3k life, etc. And so at this point, I can just blaze through maps, really quickly. Overall, there's just something really nice about not dying while you're mapping. It definitely prevents burnout and makes it easy to pull a 20-hour session on day one of the league if that's up your alley. So I tested this strategy out on stream. I de-leveled my radar all the way to level 60. I removed my Uber Ascendancy and started completely from scratch to the point of having to run the initial 6 contracts to unlock the rogues. And we were able to get all the way through to red maps with, I think, under 10 deaths overall. It was the fastest I've ever mapped, and not dying constantly was definitely reducing burnout. I had a great time doing it, and I'm looking forward to next league now that I've refined the strat, because I think this is going to be a really solid way to approach reaching red maps as early as possible without, basically corpse rushing the entire game. In the past, I am used to getting to red maps on over 100 deaths, and this is a really good way to avoid that, I think, and this is just a great strategy overall. If you like this video, give me a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.